Hi campers. Welcome to the spring edition of the Governance Committee. We'll start with going through the agenda. I can see that there are no apologies, so there are no substitute members. So item number 3, declarations of interest. Have there been any, or does anybody want to throw their hand up? No? Okay, item number 4, minutes. We received the email from Gemma explaining the minutes weren't available yet, but I'm sure you've all watched the video on YouTube a million times. So we'll kick this one down the road until next time when they can get approved. So we'll just note that. Okay, so just before we go into item number 5, we'll play the acronym game. There are a couple that I found. RIPA, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. DPIA, Data Protection Impact Assessment. CAF, Cyber Assessment Framework. TLD, Technical Landscape Document. And PDR, Personal Development Review. Had to Google a couple of them. The others you should probably already know if you've ever done a workplace induction like COSH and LOLA, so I won't go through them. And obviously as well, again, just normal stuff. So if you're going to be referring to a bit in the agenda, could you please tell us what the page number is? If you want us to get all aboard your train of thought, you need to direct us to the right platform. So let's move on to item number 5, which is the quarterly internal audit update report. And that's going to be pages 5 to 34. And it's going to be done by Simon. There you go. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is our regular quarterly internal audit update report summarising the work undertaken on your behalf by the East Kent Audit Partnership since the last meeting of this Governance Committee, which was back in February. We had quite a small report to the February meeting, so we now have rather a lengthy report. If I can draw your attention to the table on page 7, that summarises 10 new pieces of work undertaken and completed during this quarter. Very pleased to report substantial assurance in some significant areas of the Council's operations. We undertook a review of Partnership 1 business rates. Clearly a lot of money flows through business rates, so very pleasing to conclude substantial assurance in that area. We also undertook a review of the governance arrangements within Partnership 1, and that also concluded substantial assurance. CCTV, certainly an important area as regards community safety. That concluded largely substantial assurance. We did give it a partially limited assurance. There are some areas for improvement around signage, peer reviews, etc. We'll be undertaking the follow-up in the normal way, and hopefully the limited will come up to at least reasonable, if not substantial. Payroll and employee allowances, because of the very significant amount of money that goes through the payroll system, we undertake a payroll audit on an annual basis and look at different aspects of the payroll system. Very pleased to record substantial assurance with no recommendations in that area. It really doesn't get any better than that. Climate change, obviously a topic close to all of our hearts. Very pleased to report there a very solid, reasonable assurance with only 2 medium priority recommendations for improvement. Performance management, we did conclude limited assurance, and you'll note from the bullet points that there are areas for improvement surrounding staff performance management and also the linkage between performance management and risk management. External funding arrangements, we actually undertook both the original audit and the follow-up during the same quarter for this one. The initial audit concluded limited assurance, but due to the prompt action by management, we were able to increase that assurance level to reasonable at the time of follow-up. Housing repairs and maintenance. Again, this is an area where we concluded limited assurance with identified areas for improvement, which are bullet pointed within the report. Obviously, we'll be coming back to undertake a follow-up, possibly reporting that to the next meeting, although I think the next meeting in this committee is 25th of June, so that might be touch early to bring the follow-up. Grounds maintenance, concluded no assurance in that area, with quite a lot of recommendations for improvement. Having said that, you'll note from the management response that at least 23 of those recommendations have already been implemented, and we are being welcomed back for follow-up in the early summer. We had a similar situation at a neighbouring site where we concluded no assurance on grounds maintenance, again a site where it's run in-house as opposed to via a contractor, and due to prompt action by management they were able to turn that around quickly. So we're hoping that that will also be the case here, and that we can report a much higher level of assurance, hopefully to the next meeting. ICT supply chain cybersecurity, very important area. Cybersecurity is probably one, if not the most significant risk facing most organisations, and that risk is only growing. This audit was undertaken as a piece of consultancy, so we didn't put an assurance level on it. It was run across all 4 of the East Kent cluster councils. What I would say, and an absolute credit to Abby Robinson and her team, had we put an assurance level on it, it would have been substantial, and Dover's was certainly the most well controlled across the East Kent cluster. So very impressive to see that, particularly in such an important area of cybersecurity. In terms of follow-up, obviously follow-up is a very important part of our work, typically 3 to 6 months after completion of the initial audit. We go back and undertake a follow-up and check what has been implemented. If I could draw your attention to the table on page, here with me, page 25. We undertook 2 follow-ups during the period. One I've already mentioned, external funding protocol, that moved from limited assurance to reasonable. The other area, ICT physical and environmental controls, both reasonable assurance before and after follow-up. In terms of the annexes to the report, page 27, Annex 1, that's a list of high and critical recommendations outstanding after follow-up. Very pleased to report that that is a clean annex, nothing to escalate to you. Everything that should have been implemented was implemented on time. Very pleasing to report. Page 28, Annex 2, they're the areas where we've concluded limited or no assurance, where the follow-up needs to be done. That's really just to keep them on the radar. They'll be coming forward to you either at the next meeting or the meeting after that, depending on the implementation dates of the recommendations. Page 29 shows completion of the audit plan to the 31st of March, obviously the end of the financial year. We actually overachieved 111% of the agreed number of days, so we'll be adjusting for that in 26-27. And finally, page 32, Annex 4, that's our balance scorecard of key performance indicators for the East Kent Audit Partnership itself. Thank you, Chair. Obviously happy to take any questions that members have on any of the items on the agenda.
Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got 3, you'll be pleased to know. The first is on page 10 to 11. It's CCTV, which is para 2.3. There are 5 separate recommendations required to be completed before the limited assurance can be raised. Are we happy that activities are now taking place to resolve these? And what are the completion dates mentioned at the bottom of page 11? Second question is on page 15, 2.6.2, performance assurance. I just wondered why PDRs are actually optional. I mean, when my previous employment, when I was doing PDRs, they weren't optional, and they were normally agreed between an employee and line manager, and then monitored quarterly during one-to-one discussions between, the two during the year. I'm just wondering why that is not taking place in this organisation. Page 23, grounds maintenance. Yeah, we had a discussion about this back on Monday, and at first when I looked at this, I thought I was horrified, to be honest, and then I suddenly realised that we weren't considering performance, we were actually considering the health and safety issues, which in themselves are still extremely important. And I noticed that, yeah, a considerable number have now been resolved already, but that still leaves about 34 that need to be completed. On page 24, it does refer to an action plan which is in place. I'm wondering if this committee could be given sight of that action plan so that we can be satisfied that things are ongoing and progressing fairly steadily. Thank you. That's all my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. I think the first question was in terms of CCTV. Sorry, Councillor, could I just ask you to remind me of the question on CCTV? I was listening to.
Yeah, sure. 5 separate recommendations required to be completed before limited assurance can be raised. Are activities now taking place to resolve these, and what are the completion dates mentioned at the bottom of page 11?
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, management have agreed to implement all of the recommendations within the report. That audit was finalised probably about 4 to 6 weeks ago. The implementation dates were May into June, so we should be able to bring the follow-up for that one forward to the June meeting of this committee. Yes, please. Thank you.
So I'll take the PDR question then. So in terms of why are they optional, these are very much personal development reviews. This is about people being able to progress, develop themselves, so, look at training opportunities and sort of those kind of things. We've taken the approach that actually sort of management is an ongoing conversation, so people should be having one-to-ones either weekly, fortnightly, monthly, depending on their role and their arrangements with their managers. So the personal development, sometimes people just want to come in, they want to do their role, they don't want to develop, they don't want to be an accountant. I don't know why they wouldn't want to be an accountant, but some of them don't. They don't want to do qualifications, those kind of things. Yeah, isn't it? And they are happy to do that, but so long as they are being managed, they have regular one-to-ones, they are sort of maintaining their workload, their work quality, and that's the approach we've taken. It's very much supports moving forward, looking at neurodiverse a workforce, and sometimes people don't like that sort of focus on this moment in time where you have to do this formal review, so more flexible, more fluid conversations, and taking that forward. So it doesn't mean that performance management is not happening, that happens through the one-to-ones, and obviously if there are performance issues, they will be dealt with on a one-to-one basis with the managers. So the PDRs specifically are about giving those people that opportunity, and to a vast extent it's individuals' responsibility to develop themselves and sort of take the proactive approach.
Can I answer the question about the action plan in relation to grounds maintenance? Yeah, is that okay? So very happy to share the action plan. I'm happy for committee members to monitor the delivery of that. It's worth noting, and I'd refer you to page 23, it's worth noting in relation to the grounds maintenance audit that at the time of writing this response, 23 actions had been completed. The audit was, I think, returned in March, so that within a few weeks we'd completed 23 actions. I hope I'm quoting this too correctly, but today I think we've completed 34 of the 57 actions. So we're motoring through them. Some of them are, as you'll see from the management response, some of them are quite quick and easy to resolve. Others are slightly more tricky, but we are motoring through those. And as Simon rightly says, that's why we are have requested a follow-up audit in August, so we can get this ticked off and resolved. One of the main issues in relation to the audit was about welfare at the depot, and that was very quickly resolved by moving the staff down to this building to be located from. So, you know, we've responded quickly to the recommendations made within the audit, and I will arrange, I don't know quite how, but I will arrange for the action plan to be shared.
Before you come in, Councillor Beer, just a really quick one, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but if a lot of the actions were easy to fix and quick, why was it that those things, or was it that they hadn't been highlighted, or what was the reason? Lack of resource?
So quite a few of the actions related to the depot. So that I can't tell you how many exactly, but let's say 15, 20 actions were associated with the depot. That was quite a lot of those were easy to resolve quickly. Quite a few of the actions related to digitalisation and record keeping, and that was quite easy to ensure that we responded to that. Some of the more tricky actions involve certification, making sure that appropriate certification was in place, and that's taken a little bit longer. One of the more fundamental actions is about ensuring that operational staff undertake the same training packages as office-based staff. They don't have access to IT equipment, so arranging for them to go through that training is more difficult, but again, not particularly difficult. So we've, you know, a lot of these actions are quite low level, and therefore been quite easy to resolve quite quickly.
Councillor Beer.
My question is related to the same area, and there's two questions. I mean, one is this particular part of the council affected by the fact that some of the staff, you know, they join the team in the summer months and then they're not employed through the year. That's just a technical thing as to why things like training certificates and stuff are not up to date. But my probably more important question is, reading through this, it's kind of confirmed something which I've suspected for some time, which is that this little area of council just goes and does its thing and nobody takes much notice of it. And I'm interested in when it last got audited, and does it get really good supervision, or is it because it's so clearly different from other stuff, you know, as looking after the green spaces, it's not the same as if they're all sitting in an office with computers in front of them. So
I'm not sure I can answer all those questions, if I'm honest. Some, particularly when it was last audited, I wouldn't have that information to hand. But I do know, and if Darren was here, the manager of the service, he would say that it has been subject to health and safety executive audits. It's been subject to various audits by various organisations. So I think I would say the team were surprised that with the result of the audit. And I think also if the team were here, they would say that although these issues have been identified, a lot of them are kind of one-offs. That doesn't mean that, you know, that therefore they're not happening. I accept that from an audit point of view. Clearly, you know, the purpose of audit is to identify issues and enable us to put them right. That process will work. As I say, we've responded quickly to address the welfare issue at the depot. I am confident when audit come back in August, that they'll be able to feed back to you that if not all of these actions have been resolved, and therefore the level of assurance will be much higher.
As lead councillor for climate change, I've been asking for at least 2 or 3 years for things like strategies and policies on issues around our green spaces, and I think there's a gap there which needs attention, and that's really my question about whether it's been audited before, because in a perfect world you have the strategy, you have the action plan, you have yearly plans, and things get better and better. And just looking at this, it doesn't seem like we're in that place yet. And I know the rest of my question, the technical stuff and the detail, is really overview and you know, not to governance, but I think the strategies and policies and, you know, overview is an interesting one for our committee.
It's not something I've got the detail on, if I'm totally honest, but I am aware that we have a policy officer working in that area, and she's done lots of work to develop policies and strategies, etc. We also have a business plan, as I'm sure you're well aware, there's one for each service area, which identifies an improvement plan for each service. Plus now on top of that, we have this 57 point, well, minus 23, we have an improvement plan to respond to the audit. So we'll be working through all of those. As I say, I'm confident when you get the audit result after August, that will demonstrate that we have addressed the issues that have been identified, and we are taking those on board, as I say, and working through them as quickly as we can.
I'm just going to bring it back to Simon for a minute.
Thank you, Chair. The answer to the question in terms of when it was last audited is October 22. We concluded split assurance at that time of limited stroke reasonable. There were recommendations surrounding the formal approval by members of service standards. There were also some health and safety issues surrounding fire safety raised at that time. Thank you.
I think it went Councillor Loughman, then Councillor Williams. So, Councillor Loughman first.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 points I have, I think. On page 11, the register of signage, there's an internal maintenance map that was informed was to be completed by the end of March. I'm just wanting assurances that that was the case. On page 16, performance and KPIs should be independently verified. Can I ask how this is being done on the time scale? And on page, yes, there is something on in relation to there should be better support in relation to PMF and risk management, and I was just wondering about how that process is being undertaken. And on page 18 and 19, we're talking about housing repairs and maintenance and the post-inspection unacceptable level 14 out of 15 visits. And I'm wondering if there were aspects in process, not operationally, but in management terms, that we were going to get reassurance of at a future committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think in terms of the first two questions, I don't think I can really answer them until we do the follow-up to see how the recommendations have been addressed. We should be bringing those two on CCTV forward to the June meeting, and we'll certainly be testing them. Perhaps I could report back to the June meeting on those.
Just can I answer the question? Sorry, Councillor. Can I answer the question about post-inspections? You can see the management response in relation to post-inspections. We're confident that the post-inspection process is working effectively, and the repairs that are identified for post-inspection are being surveyed, and if they fail, we're not paying for that work. Clearly, there will be a follow-up audit to that, hopefully soon, and that will demonstrate that that process is working effectively. That's probably all I can say at this point.
Thank you, Andy. I'm sure we'll have a turnaround in those figures come June. I was going to thank Simon for the 11% bonus, but thank you for the report.
Councillor Williams.
I wanted to ask a bit more about the CCTV signage. You say this will be made available upon Is that okay? Okay, fine. The CCTV signage, it says the signage will be reviewed and an internal map has been created. It'll be made available upon request to the public. How will the public know about this? That's one question.
I'm afraid, councillor, we don't, this side of the room don't know the answer to that question. We will get you an answer, but I'm afraid we haven't got the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. And also on on housing, I don't know if I can ask here, are there with MERS, are they, does MERS do the inspections or does DDC staff do the inspections? And are there enough of them? Are there enough repairs inspectors doing the job?
So largely we do the post inspections as in the council, but there is a joint inspection process as well. In terms of the inspectors, well, we do have vacancies in that team, so we're not inspecting the number of repairs that we could, but we are targeting the inspections at the repairs that are highest risk.
Okay, I'll jump in with a couple of questions that haven't already been asked. Back to page 18 and obviously the housing repairs and maintenance. So the question is, how's tenant satisfaction being reconciled with the audit findings and showing poor quality control, just out of curiosity? And then my other question is probably very directed to Simon in regards to the CCTV signage. So when I looked into it, there isn't actually a statutory recommendation on what CCTV signage should look like. There are certain nuances regarding visibility and GDPR and all the rest, but how is it then that you've come to that assertion regarding the CCTV? Whoever would like to field those questions? Yeah.
So in relation to satisfaction, tenant satisfaction with the housing service and repair service, you can see the management response, that there were 23 testing done, 23 controls, and 21 were identified as being effective or partly effective. Now, we don't agree with some of the conclusions in relation to that. And to be fair to the audit team, they've made comments, and because we were going through the regulator of social housing inspection, we didn't get back to the audit team to correct some of their conclusions. But we don't agree with some of those the recommendations. Particularly, there are some around meetings, and there's evidence within the audit that we'd learnt through the audit process, and actually the quality of the meetings we were having with contractors at the end of that process were of a high standard. We don't agree with the comments around work in progress. But again, we didn't get back to the auditor to correct those, and we also don't agree with their conclusions on post inspections, but we didn't get back to the auditor to correct them. That's why we're quite confident, or very confident, that when the follow-up audits are completed, we'll be able to demonstrate that those processes are working correctly.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of CCTV signage, it's a very important issue. It sounds a small one, but if we don't put up adequate signage, then we run the risk of the CCTV no longer being overt, but becoming covert, which would require RIPA authorisation, which we almost certainly wouldn't get. In terms of the guidance, I think it says that the signage should be numerous and in close proximity to the cameras. So if you're walking into the field of view, you know before you get there that the cameras are going to be there. What we found is that the authority had updated the signage to new formats in some areas, but not all. So our expectation is that the signage would look the same across the district so that people know what they're looking for.
But is there a set standard that has to be the case? Or that, you know, for instance, we could decide in here we're going yellow, but outside we're going to go pink. And is there anything that says that there has to be a set standard that all CCTV signage needs to be the same?
No, there's not, but we'd like to see it consistently applied outside.
with my microphone on. Do we have any more questions? No? Well, that paper was for noting, so could I get a general consensus that we're all in love with it? Thank you very much. Right, so in that case, we'll move on to the next item, which will be the indicative audit plan for the Dover District Council. And this is on pages 35 to 67. And, or have I jumped ahead? No, I haven't. No, Grant Thornton, would you like to take it away?
Thank you, Chair. In what seems like 5 minutes since we presented the audit findings for 2024-25, we're back with our audit plan for 2025-26. And our huge thanks must go to the finance team who, with only a few days of respite between finishing 24-25, they welcomed the audit team, perhaps not with open arms, but they did welcome the audit team back to begin our audit planning for 25-26. I did apologise for that, Helen. As the chair has pointed out, this is an indicative plan, and it's an indicative plan for two reasons. Firstly, as set out on page 37 of the pack, we need to discuss and agree with management a strategy for rebuilding assurance that will be reported back to MHCLG. So clearly we want to take time on that to make sure that we are reporting the right things. And this is essentially to get us from the disclaimed opinion, which is where we're saying we have absolutely no assurance over the numbers in these accounts, that has been in place since 2020-21 accounts, to get to a point where we can say, yes, we have assurance on either part or all of these financial statements. And we have time set aside with management in May to get that ball rolling and get that report into MHCLG. And the other reason it's an indicative plan, on page 39, we set out that we are working with the finance team on whether group accounts are required following the investment in Partnership 1, along with Thanet and Canterbury councils. Grant Thornton also audit those councils, so I'm working with the audit teams on those councils as well to make sure we're all being consistent. So for both of these items, we do intend to bring back a final audit plan to the June Governance Committee. I will run you through all the bits and pieces that I have to run you through. I'll take it fairly quickly. As always, management override of controls is a significant risk. It's a presumed risk. We'll never get away from it. The next two, we have fraud and error and revenue recognition. Again, a presumed risk, but we are able to rebut it in cases where we feel the inherent risk is low enough. We have not rebutted, again, due to the fact that we still have a significant risk of material misstatement surrounding bank reconciliations. Similarly, for fraud and error and expenditure recognition, that is a presumed risk in the public sector, able to be rebutted, but as for income, we have not rebutted that risk due to the bank reconciliations. And bank reconciliations, I will note there has been a huge amount of progress in this area, and the finance team have done a lot of work. However, there was an issue arising over the festive break with Technology One and capacity constraints during the financial year, which meant that reconciliations were not always performed on a timely basis. And as such, we have retained that significant risk for the 25-26 audit, but remain hopeful we can get rid of it soon. Next, we move on to evaluation of land and buildings. Management have accelerated their evaluation cycle, meaning that by the end of, well, we've passed March, March 26, around 60% of the estate will have been revalued by an independent external valuer. These are big numbers, it's a significant estimate, and as such, we deem it to be a significant risk of material misstatement. Indexation will also apply for the first time this year, but that will only be on a very small proportion of assets, which is the 20% or so that were valued last year by the independent external valuer. Valuation of dwellings. This is the first year of a new beacon revaluation for the dwellings, which is again being done by the independent external valuer. This is a really big number, subject to a high level of estimation, and there will be a new beacon structure in place because we identified last year that the beacon structure really wasn't fit for purpose as it was. So that sits as its own significant risk. Valuation of pension liability, it is out with your control, but again, it's a large number and there's a huge amount of assumptions and judgments made by the actuary in compiling that valuation. So again, we sit as a significant risk. And then finally, we have repeated the risk around IFRS 16 implementation as it wasn't fully completed last year. We have had several productive discussions with management on implementation as part of our planning and interim work. Page 50 sets out our materiality assessment at the planning stage. This has increased to £2.8 million, and that's primarily due to a change in Grant Thornton methodology, and hopefully that should afford us some reduction in sample sizes as we complete audit testing, which speeds us up. On page 51, I think, in order to meet the decreased timelines for the publication of audited accounts in line with the backstop regulations, we have done a lot more advanced testing in recent weeks. So we've looked at transactions for months 1 to 9. So that reduces what we need to do at final audit. We set out, and you can see it in the timeline on page 58, that we intend to have a 4-week period from the 15th of June where we will focus purely on the closing trial balance received from the council and to select all of the samples that we wish to test. The team will then go off and do another audit for a few months, and we'll come back to Dover on the 14th of September. So that's giving the council a good lead time to get all that evidence ready for us. I'll jump you back to page 54, where we set out our value for money planning arrangements. If I start on financial sustainability, you'll see in the middle column, the 2025-26 risk assessment column, we have closed the statutory recommendations issued in January 2025. Key recommendations do remain for the timely preparation of bank reconciliations and the embedding of financial performance reporting, but it is a significant milestone to have had those statutory recommendations formally closed, recognising the improvements that have been made by management. The governance area of value for money also had 2 statutory recommendations raised. The one relating to the authority's oversight of the internal control environment has now been entirely closed, and the recommendation raised on project implementation has been taken down to a key recommendation, which will follow up this year. We identified a further 2 key recommendations in our 24-25 AAR relating to the authority's approach to external feedback and the need to produce fully code compliant accounts in 25-26, which is a huge part of that rebuilding assurance process that I spoke about. No recommendations or risks for improving the 3 E's, and nothing identified during the planning process. Finally, page 60 of the pack sets out the scale fee set by PSAA for the 25-26 audit. An absolute canter through, but I'm more than happy to take any questions and also to pass on apologies from Sophia, who forgot to register we both forgot to register for a Teams link for her. But she is watching live stream.
Thank you for that. Before I go to questions, I just have one to start to, start the ball rolling and all that. The interim audit you've asked for in November, but the statutory, you've asked for the audits to, of losing it. Statutory deadline is January, so it's a few months before. And if the finance team can't manage to get your one done, what's the sort of penalties that you're going to impose, bearing in mind the statutory one isn't due until January?
Thank you, Chair. I think it is in the report. The deadline for 25-26 audited accounts to be published is the 31st of January, as you say. The following year it will go to the 30th of November, and the 30th of November is where it will stay. So if you don't meet the 30th of November 2027, get my years muddled, if you don't meet that year, then there will be consequences. There won't be consequences this year, but we need to try to get there. We need to demonstrate that we can get there, which is why we have asked to complete by the end of November. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And just one other really quick question. The Partnership 1 group accounts, when are you going to know that they're going to need to be done? When are you going to make your decision, or at least announce it?
It is a work in progress at the moment. I'm speaking with Helen tomorrow, so she can give you more.
Did you want me to go in here? We've had some liaison with Canterbury and Thanet, because obviously we need to all come to the same conclusion, or it won't be very helpful at all. And we're hoping to meet early May to agree a joined up approach, which we can then run past the auditors and check that they are happy.
Councillor Beer.
I'm interested in the pathway to recovery and the rebuilding of assurance strategy, which you say is going to take 3 years. And does that mean on the very last day of our existence, you might stop disclaiming?
Yeah, the pathway to recovery, rebuilding of assurance, that's all MHCLG terminologies. That would be the aim, that yes, we would get you to a clean opinion at the point that you no longer become Dover District Council. But we need to work through all the ins and outs of the plan. But yeah, it's more for, I suppose, peace of mind for you, knowing that what's going into whatever authority Dover becomes, that what's going in are numbers that the auditor agrees with.
Can I ask a follow-up on that one? How will that affect that year when there's a shadow authority who have already had to build a budget for their first day of existence on disclaimed accounts? And I'm not sure whether our possible partners in that unitary will be in the same position as us, but all three of us, if we were all disclaimed, then nobody's got any assurance of anything, and they've got to build a budget on it. What's the implication there?
I think that's above my pay grade, Councillor Beer. I don't know. I think it's probably one of the things around LGR that is still being bottomed out. I know that Surrey are a year before Kent, I think, and there are a lot of disclaimed opinions in Surrey, so it'll be key to watch kind of what goes on in those new Surrey unitaries as to what's happened there, but we'll keep an eye on it.
So Chair, we have 3 more years of sleepless nights over our accounts being disclaimed before we can relax and retire.
That is,
do you agree? Sorry, that's a parliamentary question. Do you agree, Chair?
I agree. What we're going to now do is Councillor Bates, then Councillor Loughman.
Thanks. I've only got 3 questions. I'm going to follow on from Councillor Beer in relation to that paragraph on your introduction to the report, because 3 years, and 3 years, that's 2029, vesting days in April 2028, so I think it's 2 years, and just wondering why you're therefore having a rebuilding assurance strategy for 3 years rather than planning up until vesting day in 2028. Would that not save resources and funding, etc.? The next one is in relation to your comments on value for money arrangements, again in relation to the risk around bank reconciliations. You make quite clear in the statements that you make in that risk that financial services have done a good job in actually, pulling things back and getting to the point where they've managed to catch up with their reconciliations. And consequence of that, I'm just wondering why you still consider it's in the red category, whereas perhaps it should be sort of moved away from that now and put in the amber category. I accept you need to keep an eye on it, but is it really still a critical risk or not? And finally, in relation to statements that you make on the housing audits, I think it's on page 28 of your report, which is page 62. It's interesting to note that you haven't actually undertaken any audits on these two areas since 2021. I'm wondering if you could explain why that was the case. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the pathway to recovery, rebuilding of assurance is very much, it depends on the council. I think 3 years is the average time frame that we consider will be reasonable. But in every situation, we need to take other things into account, such as you will cease to exist on 31 March 2028. So really, it would be much better if we can get the house in order by then. And that's part of the discussions we will be having with management to report into MHCLG as to is it feasible that we could get there in March 28. Value for money, the bank reconciliations, it remains red because bank reconciliations are not being done on a timely basis. There's been 2 instances in the financial year where they haven't been done on a timely basis. That's why we're still picking it up as a risk. If we can get through, what year are we in now, 26, 27, with them all being done within a short space of time of the month end, then yes, we can reduce it, but it sits as a significant risk, therefore it's still red. And finally, the housing benefit audit. I know that work is ongoing for these audits. I don't know why we haven't picked up the 23-24 and beyond, and Helen is indicating she doesn't know either. So I will take that away, Councillor Bates, and come back to you on that. It's a separate team that do the grants work. So I will come back to you with a written response on that.
Helen, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I was going to come in on the pathway to recovery bit. We have talked about here where one of our big areas that we've got to resolve is the asset valuations. And we've discussed that we will look at doing that over a 3-year cycle, with the first year being 24-25. We did about a third of the assets in 24-25. We're doing about a third of the assets and housing in 25-26, and then the remainder in 26-27, along with IFRS 16 will be resolved this year, debtors and creditors. So a lot of bits are being ticked off as we go. So I, ever the optimist, would like to think that we will actually be very much, if not completely out of disclaimer, but very close to it by the end of 26-27. So for me, it's hopefully things going well. yeah, all the staff staying and a bit of stability in the team, those sorts of things, we'd be looking at 26, 27 or 27, 28, being out this, so not necessarily another 3 years from here today, looking at 28, 29. So, hopefully we will get there closer, but we will continue to work closely with Lucy and the team to try and achieve as much as we can. So there's, even if there are elements still being disclaimed, they're smaller, less significant, less of a worry. And then in terms of setting budgets, so we've still been able to set our budgets despite the disclaimed accounts. They do sit separately, although they are interrelated. And if you found a big underlying problem that we've missed some significant transactions, then that would potentially have an impact on the budget. But that's not where we are. We've been able to do those revenue checks and keep our budgets going, and the budget monitoring and the new budget monitoring reporting is all going very well. So really it's around the balance sheet, which our risks are. That doesn't necessarily stop us producing budgets. And already Kent Finance Officers Group are working together, looking at the challenges facing us with disclaimed opinions across the county, looking at what we can do in balance sheet and those sorts of preparations. So there's lots of work going on to prepare us for LGR. And then just quickly on bank reconciliation, just to give you assurance that bank recs are being done on a monthly basis now. There was a glitch with the data going in around Christmas, but for me 25, 26, we've got to bear in mind we are looking at 25, 26, so we were still in recovery in 25, 26. We are now in business as usual. So and the bank reconciliation internal audit follow-up showed that progress. So 26, 27 is back to what I would call normal. Thank you.
I was just going to jump in there. As Helen quite rightly said, we have done work on income and expenditure in each year, and we are able to give a level of assurance on income and expenditure. While yes, we have found a number of classification errors, that bottom line hasn't moved from the work we've done, which should give a level of assurance in terms of setting budgets. And apologies, I didn't think of that earlier.
Councillor Loughman.
Thank you, Chair. I too was going to go for the VFM arrangements, and so I'm glad of your answer in relation to the reconciliations in one, and that we have positive possibilities in the coming year. So I look forward to that red changing to amber. And so my question relates exactly to the governance as well, because you mentioned that there's positive directions, and I don't know, Helen, whether you want to say whether there's any specific management issues that in this area were preventing anything going to amber, or why, given the fact that there are positive moves in this direction, that was still red. So if you could enumerate in the same way as one the reason why this is red in two, I'd appreciate that, and I hope that's clear.
I think at this point, Councillor, this is a plan, and when we set the value for money risks at planning, that's primarily based on what we reported in our prior year AAR, recognising you haven't had an awful lot of time to fix it in between. So that's our starting point. Because they were key recommendations last year, makes them a significant risk, makes it red. I would very much hope we could get them down by the time we're reporting our auditor's annual report in November. Very much hope we could get that down from red. The issue in that governance, the key recommendation we raised in governance, is around the code compliant accounts. That's a bigger area of risk, and that's why it's red. Is that okay?
Okay, got any more questions? No, this item was to be considered, so again it's for noting. So general wave of hands if we're all happy. Thank you very much, Lucy and Sophia on the live link. So that's brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on to a really exciting portion of the evening. This will be item number 7, the Corporate Risk Register Quarterly Update. Take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll see, I've sabotaged my attempts to get to the front of the agenda by including pink appendix to the report now, so I think we can call that a failure. I'm going to be here for every meeting now to the end. So the quarterly risk register update before you contains 42 risks, 17 red, 12 amber, 12 yellow and 1 green. There has been one risk change since the last update, R37 bank reconciliation. It's not clear from the document, but R37 was a 10 residual risk score last update and is now a 5 residual risk this quarter. Hence it's showing as a reduced risk. The risk owner has reduced both the inherent and residual risk, which is why it shows as a 5-5. So although it looks like it's unchanged, it has actually changed. This is a positive sign in terms of the risk register maturing, and well done to the risk owner. And as it shows that mitigations a quarter ago have changed the inherent risk. So for once, not a typo from me as I initially thought after it was flagged up. As it has reduced from the last update, we therefore have the reduction, but we need to make that clearer next time to show that actually it is a reduction based on the previous quarter that has been marked. There is also one additional risk, which is set out in the restricted appendix. Introduced this update, we have added some restricted risks in the second appendix. If members wish to discuss those particular risks, we will need to exclude the press and public. We've taken this approach as we feel there is more merit in providing a full summary in the pink for members as opposed to a watered down entry in the public section, and giving you the same information on the same basis as you do get for the public risks. If there are any specific questions relating to individual risk descriptions or mitigations in the risk register summaries, I will need to take those to the risk owner and get back to you on them. One of the key themes has been to ensure that ownership remains with the risk owner as much as possible, so we want them to be able to provide the explanations where there are needs to do so. Overall, the risk strategy continues to mature with changes between updates to entries, and we continue to implement improvements in the risk register. We've changed the format of the risk entry summaries to move away from the vertical scroll, which hopefully makes it easier to read. We have a roadmap for this year and to deliver a number of enhancements to the risk register. For the municipal year 26-27, the corporate risk strategy will be reviewed given the growing number of technology-based risks that have been identified in the register. As part of this, we are working to add a dedicated technology category in the risk taxonomy. See paragraph 3.2 of the report. It currently forms part of the legal and regulatory category, but we've been that that's probably not sufficient given the rapid pace of technological advancement, particularly around AI. As identified in the annual governance statement last year, the excitement has got too much. As identified in the annual governance statement last year, work has commenced in respect of more clearly linking the quarterly strategic performance report and the quarterly corporate risk register report. The alignment of key risk indicators, as abbreviated as KRI, and key performance indicators KPI at both strategic and operational level will support both performance management and risk management. It is expected this work will be completed during the 26-27 municipal year, and the continuous improvement team is leading on this work initially. A more transparent approach to risk appetite will be introduced as well, with each risk having an assigned level of appetite. This is included in the risk mitigations and descriptions now, but it is not specifically spelled out. It is sort of part of the narrative, so we need to make that clearer. The corporate risk management strategy identifies 4 categories of risk appetite ranging from averse to eager that we will look to embed into it. Other than that, Chair, if there are any questions, happy to answer them as much as I can, but for specific issues we may need to get back to you.
Sorry, my button wasn't working then too, not just Helen's. Put that out there. Council, eh? So, what we'll say is obviously I'll give you an opportunity in item number 8 if you want to talk about any of the restricted items. So we'll keep it all on safe item number 7. So in which case we'll go Councillor Bates, then Councillor Beer.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, only one question really, and it's in relation to RO4, which is on page 78 of the agenda and 5 of the risk register, and that relates to port health functions. My main is more of a suggestion rather than a question, because what we have here are actually 2 functions which in themselves have separate risks. One is the function on checks around cytosanitary, which is the DPHA part, and the other are the checks that are taken on meat that has been illegally imported through the controls at Dover. They're separate risks. The risks around the DPHA element are likely to be removed once the government has reached a final agreement with the EU, which, according to Rachel Reeves, is likely to be around about September this year. So I would just suggest to Port Health that it would be more effective to separate those two risks, particularly in relation to POAO, which will be a continuing risk. And there are certain areas of those risks which are not even related here. For example, you have a position where on the two juxtaposed ports in Coquel and the juxtaposed port in Coquel and at Dover, Dover is operating a control with Port Health officials. Coquel isn't, which is a significant risk nationally. So I would just suggest that maybe a recommendation is made by the Governance Committee, if we can, for this to be looked at by Port Health Services and maybe have separate risks for those two. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Rebecca.
I think that sounds very sensible, particularly given, as you say, that we could have diverging sort of residual risks arising from them. So happy to take that back if you wish to make recommendations, no problem.
I can see from the faces of everybody here, we're in agreement of the recommendation to go forward. So yeah, if that's all right, that would be great. We're going to go Councillor Beer, then Councillor Mannion.
Thank you, Chair. We've got several very major risks in the early part, RO 1, 2, 3, all beyond our control. Things that very many local authorities will be living with and tackling as best they can. RO 4 is the one I also want to comment on because it's rather exclusive. There won't be many local authorities that have this one on their risk register. And as we know, if something goes wrong, this is going to be catastrophic and it will be national. It won't be exclusive to us. Completely agree with everything that's written here about major risk and impact and so on, but I think we also, just as a side mention, we should consider risk to our reputation because it will look to the ordinary resident and to national voters that Dover District Council dropped the ball or our teams drop the ball that we look after. And I think somewhere there should be also reputation management and something about have a really good communications plan so that if and when things go wrong, it's made very clear that we're acting as a government agency in a sense, and that it's not because we're not very good at controlling stuff that comes through our borders. So I'd just like to mention that the reputation management thing should be prepared for in advance. Thank you.
That could also be something that's added to that recommendation, if that's all right.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, I mean, absolutely no problem. I mean, looking at the actual sort of detail of the scoring, Lucy has put reputational as a 5/4 at 20 for both residual and the inherent risk. So that has been identified along with the other risks as one of the key risks anyway. So, but happy to look at perhaps expanding out the information provided and speak to Lucy on that.
Councillor Mannion.
Thank you, Jim. What I was wondering was how many of the risks in our risk register have actually been realised? Because I think that's part of it, learning from those incidents. And that's what I'd like to see, how many of those ones have actually occurred? How effective were our mitigations? And also, were there any other issues that weren't identified on our risk register that maybe we should have identified?
I think that the good news is that none of the world-ending ones have been realised, and so we're pretty good there. I think I would, picking on Helen, she's next to me, cite the example of the risk that we have as the reducing risk, where actually the mitigations have prevented the outcome from happening and allowed us to change, which I think is a very positive, and obviously the way we'd hopefully go for all of them. I can't think of any of these risks where we actually have had the risk manifest as we sort of identify as a risk, which is very positive in some ways, but it may also mean that we need to look at the residual score and whether it's too high and needs to be lowered down.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit muddled about the dates at the bottom. If you have a look at excuse me, RO2, the review date was 03/03/2025. I'm sure it has been looked at since then. Could you explain a bit?
So obviously we need to gather all these up in advance to prepare them, go through the necessary processes for committee report approval and bring them out to you. So the risks, we ask for officers to have a look at them as early as late January in some cases, to give officers time to review. In this case, we asked in January for them to review it, and then 25, sorry, that's a typo, that should be 26. That's been pointed out by my colleague. That should be the 3rd of the 3rd, 26, not 25. There is a typo in there after all that.
Thank you for that. But even other ones are past the 26 dates, 09/04. That's 9th of April. That date has passed. Was that the date that it came in? Oh, so sorry.
Was reviewed. Sorry.
Sorry, yes, just to point out. So the review date is the date at which the officer reviewed the document last and made any changes or decided that no changes required. So all of those will be in a line from late November through to early April, depending on how regular the risk is having to be reviewed. Obviously, some risks due to the nature of them when we're not reviewing as quickly as others, those that things are changing on or potentially changing on, we're reviewing much quicker. So you'll see some of them are being reviewed right up almost to agenda publication for changes that need to be made. Others are more static, so the updates to them are taking place over a slightly longer period. But between sort of this update and the next update, all of the risks will again have been reviewed and updated and amended as needed. So it is a constantly moving cycle. It's not like with the performance indicators where there's a deadline, we stop. So the performance indicators Q4 ends 31st of March. Anything that happens on the 1st of April is the next quarter. With the risk register, what we want to do is give you the most up to date we can. So even up to virtually publication, we are making tweaks to ensure that we're not giving you information that is unnecessarily old, so that you have as close to the relevant as you can. Obviously, as we continue to improve and develop, and as the software continues to improve and develop, we may even be able to get much more swish and do more quite sort of up to the minute almost. But for this one, it's as close to agenda publication, we're making changes.
Okay, I'll jump in. Just linking it back to internal audit and external audit actually as well. When items get found to have limited or no insurance, does that trigger an automatic review? And if something significant is found in one of these audits, how quickly is that reflected in the risk register? And so what's the process behind that?
So obviously all the audits go to CMT. So that will be the trigger point for things being included into the risk register. The CMT saying, OK, that's a risk that needs to go in, or that's an operational risk and doesn't need to go in, but still needs to be monitored and dealt with. I think the key point here is something that we've talked about very, very lightly with the EKAP, and we need to start doing proper work on in more sort of part of our summer of work, is that we need to formalise and ensure that we're documenting and showing that everything is being considered and done, and being able to demonstrate to you in the risk register that that's been done. It is, I'm fairly confident, happening at CMT level, very confident it's happening at CMT level, that they see the audits, they take the changes they need to do. What we're missing is that link to show you that that process has happened, and taking the theme that if we're not documenting and showing you it isn't happening, we need to be able to prove that that is happening and done. I can't talk about specific ones and specific ones. I'm not at that conversation with CMT always, so that's obviously down to them. But we certainly aren't getting risks coming forward that are sort of lagging behind the facts on incidents. It's not like, oh gosh, that's happened and now we're sort of trying to do it, they tend to be fairly quick. Obviously, you're seeing them on a quarterly cycle, so things are happening in between those cycles internally. We need to do better at showing that. We need to show our homework and actually make sure it's clear. We need to make sure that that process is as transparent as possible so that you can have faith that we are picking up these points. So could absolutely do more, do better, and particularly showing our homework on it.
Yeah, please.
I was just going to pop in and say that any kind of improvements and process changes you're making should also be documented in your annual governance statement. Again, if you don't document it, it's not done. So we look to see the story when we read the annual governance statement, because we've seen the internal audit reports throughout the year. So we would look to kind of see that all coming together there.
In that case, the good news is you'll be seeing it in June.
That's good, because we love to hear the gossip, don't we? So the only other thing was, and it's kind of been loosely touched on, it's with all the red risks that there are, and some of them are end of the world ones that are there, but there are other ones that are red that are sort of more sort of significant, or at least targeted to us. How are we as members supposed to prioritise which of those red risks are like, you know, red risk, or like red hot, like that's a real risk?
I would probably use the scoring as on the residual risk as the way of prioritising. So anything that after mitigation is still a 25, or is in our sort of category, and then obviously as they go down the list, you get some form of mitigation coming in. One of the things we do need to do is, as part of the risk appetite, is to formalise what we're showing you about the council's acceptance of some of those risks. So some of them we may have no choice because they're threats beyond our control, an existential threat. Others are not, and we need to show that our risk appetite in respect of this risk is averse or eager or somewhere in between, and be able to document that. And again, that's a change we need to add in. We've had these discussions before about, do we sort of thin the wood and bring you just sort of the top 15 or the top 10 that are identified as the highest category? We've at the moment stuck with providing you the full register so you can see the whole range. I think personally that's probably the best approach, although it is more information before you, because things will move up and down. So if you've seen something is like an orange in one quarter and is a red in the next, you've seen that movement, you understand perhaps the journey it's on and why the mitigation is not working. So I would say just do it in number score order for the residual risk. If it's a 25, that's the one to focus on first, and then the 20s and so on.
Do we have any more questions? Councillor Mannion.
It's not a question so much as a comment, which is, and this is why I was trying to get to, that you can't have a 25 if it's not happening. If it only happens maybe once every 5 years, it's not a 25. And so I think, yes, the impact is huge, but it's the likelihood. That's the other part of the equation. We need to make sure that we're, giving the right likelihood. Not just say, oh, because it's an impact is, 5, we've got to give it a 5 on likelihood as well. It doesn't work like that. So I heard you say something about that. So I just, like to see more work on that. Thank you, Chairman.
That is a very good point. One of the things that we're going to look to do, and we're Andy here, we had a meeting yesterday, I think it was, or maybe the day before, where we talked about looking at those risks where after mitigation has been applied, there's been no change in the residual score from the inherent. That would imply that the mitigation has not worked, or it has worked and we have been too cautious in adjusting the score. So now we look, I completely take on board the point. If it's a 25-25, then, but yeah, on the 5x5, that we need to ensure that we are genuine in this, and it's not something that is there as informational. And this is where the issue we've had with existential risk beyond our control, which are down as 25-25, sorry, the 5-5, because if it happens, they will be absolutely disastrous. But the likelihood of them is that, 6 editions of the corporate risk register later, we're still at a 25 on those. So it's something we need to have a look at, completely take that point on board.
Any more for any more? No? Okay. this is another one that is for noting. So, okay, moving on in the agenda, we have an opportunity to exclude the press and public if we want to move on to our specific questions about the restricted information. Would anybody like to do that? Yes. Yes.
I'd propose that we do. I have one question in this area.
Can't wait to hear it. Councillor Bates, you're seconding. Okay, in which case I have a little blurb to read. Yeah, I've seen nods, so we're in agreement. We're going to go ahead. A resolution has been passed to exclude the press and public. I'd like to thank all of those that have taken the time to watch the public part of this meeting. Please could I ask Democratic Services to end the meeting broadcast and confirm when it's been done?